Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Legal and Finance Committee meeting. It is January 15th, approximately 12:30 in the afternoon. We would like to start the meeting with a roll call and determination of quorum, please. Here. Here. Thank you. And if we could move on next to the adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Drew and a second by Mr. Nordstrom. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now is the time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken on the meeting on any issue not on the agenda, except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. Seeing no public comment for issues not on the agenda, we will now move on to consent items 1 through 11. Public comment is now closed. Are there any council members that would like to remove any items from the consent calendar? Councilman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Items 10 and 11, please.
Okay, 10 and 11.
Yep.
And Councilwoman Drew.
6. Item 6.
Number 6. Do I have a motion to approve consent 1 through 9 with the exception of 6?
Second.
Okay, motion by Lewis, second by Lehman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same side. Motion carries. We now move on to item 6, approve resolution number 2019-101, a resolution levying assessment for abatement of nuisances. Chair recognizes Darla Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to address a question to Ken Young, please. I believe that he could answer these.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, Ken. So when I was looking at these today, we have an assessment for the abatement of nuisances. Is that for our cleanup costs? What is the assessment for?
Yes, so when there is a nuisance out there identified by code enforcement officers, that they will issue a citation, give some time for that to be taken care of by the property owner. When that doesn't occur, then a contractor is contacted and asked to go ahead and take care of that cleanup, whether it be yard cleanup or weeds or snow removal, whatever. So it would be the cost of that plus an administrative fee.
Right, right. And we let them know how. We do it through a letter, and then how much time do they have to respond, do you know?
Normally 10 days.
Oh, 10 days. Okay. Because, you know, as spring approaches, I'll hear from people in my ward about nuisances and cleanup and things like that. So I just wanted to have some kind of an idea of what the process was. I think this might be something we might want to revisit at some point, because I've heard often that the 10 days is simply not enough time to respond. Okay. So that's all I need to know. So thank you for now. All right. I yield.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who gets this question, if it's finance or the attorney's office, but on this same issue is that we are seeing, occasionally we see people that are frequent flyers on this, and we have passed I forget if it's a resolution or an ordinance, that if they do not comply within 1 year after 3 times, then we escalate the administrative fees on that. So is this for the finance or is this for the attorney's office? Who wants to take on this one?
We're not seeing any takers right now.
Takers. Well, what I'm primarily...
I don't recall that ever passing. But we get everything from the code enforcement officers as far as what we should bill out, which would also include what they charge for administrative fees. But I don't think we charge anything more than just the $42 for that administration fee for code enforcement.
I'll see if I can't find it when we did that conversation, whether we passed it or not. I thought we did, but anyway, what we have turned into in the past is becoming property managers for some of these properties, and so we go out and do the cleanup on a regular basis. and we abate the nuisance on it, and then it seems like the frequent flyers have figured out the system, and we see them on repetitive nuisances. So I'm just curious if we are doing anything with that or can do anything with that, if we have not passed something on the, I call it the escalated fee schedule for the administrative part of it. So if that needs some more conversation, I'll gladly take some more conversation time at a later time to do that, because I just don't feel that the city should be the property managers for these people all the time. So thank you. I'll do some more research on my side.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. I would entertain a motion. Oh. We don't have a motion yet. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Second.
We have a motion by Lewis and a second by Drew. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now move on to item number 10. Authorize the RSVP Plus program to apply and accept year two of their Corporation for National and Community Service grant. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will probably wind up going to Pauline, as she is one of the overseers of the RSVP program, but I just wanted to acknowledge that the RSVP folks have really turned around that program that is going on right now. So if someone makes the motion on this, I would really support that. These folks have really tried hard to make some significant changes over that. And I'll look to Pauline to see if she wants to make any additional comments about RSVP Plus for the city of Rapid City.
Thank you, Richie. I would echo his comments that Ann has done a phenomenal job with the program. We still have not heard back on the grant application for the Northern Hills. You guys authorized us to go out for that. We should hear in the next month or two if we actually receive that grant or not. This one in particular is year two of a 3-year proposal. Basically, it's about $50,000 that the grant is, and then our total budget's around $70,000. So the rest comes in-kind expenses or through donations and other foundational grants that Ann has applied for. And Dave in my office too. He's the direct supervisor of that program. He does a great job as well.
Right, and we would entertain a motion. A motion by Lehman, second by Lewis. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 11, approve final recommendations for the fiscal year 2020 Community Development Block Grant, Entitlement Funds, and Neighborhood Lift Lot Allocations. Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'll make a motion to approve this recommendation. If I get a second, retain the floor.
Second.
Okay, go ahead.
And since we've got Michelle here to give us a little summary of what this amounts to and how this works, because I've got a couple of, I have been receiving questions about this process, and I've directed them to talk to Michelle. So let me introduce Michelle Schulke, who is the director of this program and does what I can tell is a fabulous job of handing out grants. So if you want to give us a little summary of what this involves and how this works.
Of course, thank you. Michelle Schulke with the CDBG Program Division. Once a year we have an application cycle, and the applications are due October 1 of every year. That is for the upcoming fiscal year that starts in the following April 1, and goes for 12 months until the following end of March. And the investment committee does a fabulous job of vetting these applications and really allocating and giving recommendations to the council for the proposals that meet our community needs as well as the national objectives of the program.
Thank you. As I stated, I've gotten some questions from people that have been passed over. And so I want to give you a heads up that they will probably be coming to seek you for some advice on how to get back on the grant list. So, and it's not an easy decision who gets it and who doesn't get it. So I applaud the group that is involved with the grants that are handed out. So thank you very much for taking the charge of that. Thank you.
Of course. And we do offer technical assistance all year round for anyone who's interested.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you for addressing those concerns for us. We have a motion by Nordstrom and a second by Drew. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will now move on to non-consent items. Now is the time for public comment. We do have 2 public comment speakers. The first one received was from Doyle Estes, and it's concerning number 13. Would you like to address us, Mr. Estes?
Good afternoon. My wife, Kathy Johnson, and I are here to discuss our interest in working with the city to use the tax increment district process to extend Homestead Street out on the east part of town so that we'll connect Timmins Boulevard to DeGeest. Last year I was contacted by Richie Nordstrom and Bill Evans with regards to what might be done to get that road built, and I thought it for some time and came back with the idea that if the city would be interested in working with us to use the tax increment district to build the road, we would be willing to cooperate. We are currently involved ourselves or with property that we've recently sold out there with developments that I believe will add in excess of $14 million to our tax base. So if we include that property that's being developed by us or by the people I just sold property to, that tax increment district would pay itself off in less than 10 years. If there is no interest by the city in working with us on that tax increment district, I don't think the road will be built. The cost is in the neighborhood of $1 million, and we are not in a situation that's beneficial to us to spend $1 million to build the road. I have been in communication with Kumar of the school district, and they're quite interested in having a better way to get to the school. I've been in contact with the fire department. They're interested in doing that. My concern of being here today is to tell you that we are willing to work with the city to use the tax increment district process under today's rules. I haven't examined what you're going to do if you change the rules, but my offer to the city to use the tax increment district for us to finance the district, to finance the cost of construction, is based on the current rules. And if you change the rules, that offer is off the board, and we'll have to take a look at to see what the impact is under the new rules. I just wanted to put that on the table that, you know, if you change the rules, our offer is withdrawn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Estes. The chair now recognizes Kent Haig. Would you like to address the council, Mr. Haig?
My name's Kent Haig, Whiting Haig, Dorsey and Haig law firm, and also come here with a couple different hats on. One is a former and current practicing city attorney in some jurisdictions, but also as a developer. So I've seen both sides of how the TIF system statutorily really can be a key to whether something happens or does not. And although we didn't even plan this, Mr. Doyle's comments, I think, are living proof of just how this would affect it. I'll begin my comments also by letting you know that in the past planning and zoning commissions that I have appeared on this matter, John Way with Bank West has also been to many of those meetings and has echoed very serious concerns about the proposed TIF guideline changes. There are some fundamental changes in there that absolutely, not just in my opinion, but when you look at the law and look at what it says it wants to do, you really gut the abilities of what a city can do under state law. And I understand there are pros and cons to every issue. However, a choice that limits one's, meaning the city council in this case, limits a board's authority or ability or limits their discretion as to what they can do and how they can utilize one of the key, if not one of the only significant tax economic development tools, being a tax increment district. If you limit yourself in the scope of how that can be done, it's a tremendous mistake. John Way, who could not be here today, I talked to him about this yesterday, he also echoes this and also said that Bank West, which is probably one of the larger, if not the largest funding bank that funds TIFs in this area, would not be interested in doing it under these provisions, these new provisions. So, and I can get into the weeds on some of these, but these in general are the concerns of many of the folks that I've visited with in the developer community, but also from legal to lawmaker to economic development such as Elevate. What we've proposed, and Patsy has been incredibly patient because we've all got our day jobs, but, and I don't know that frankly I'll do another TIF. I've got TIF 70, that's getting wrapped up, that's great. I don't know that I'll do another TIF. I really have nothing on my radar. So I'm here purely as offering input to keep the city council from making a mistake in adopting these guidelines in a subsequent ordinance. Now, one thing that has been stated many times that, well, it's just guidelines. Well, there is a subsequent ordinance on there as well, adopting the guidelines and those kind of things. But when you go through the proposed guidelines, you'll see some language that is mandatory. There's musts and there's shalls and there's those types of things. Also, there are rating systems as to giving priority, and that's fine, except to the extent that the extent that it may hinder the what a program would be eligible for under state law because of our own guidelines, and therefore toss it out. One, which is I think a very well-meaning but completely wrong-headed way to go, is the requirement that if there is any residential development inside a TIF district, that 30%, as I recall in here, must be affordable. 5% of that must be under a certain level of the poverty level. Well, not all developments, subdivisions, commercial, whatever it is, not all residential subdivisions that may seek a TIF and it be vital to have a TIF, that's certainly not in that business model. The case in point was it would have required that the Meadows, for instance, up on Highway 16, somehow incorporate in the district affordable housing. Again, in and of itself, that's fine. But it certainly can be one of those stopgaps, or those non-starters in many, if not most. A subdivision like Red Rocks that produces millions of dollars in tax revenues, they would not have qualified to get that water up there. There's example after example of that. So I would request that that it be tabled, continued, whatever it would be. And what we've offered, what we're trying to put together, is a group of a developer, banker, economic development such as Elevate, and other interested parties, the new words stakeholders in this process, and come up with a comprehensive plan for these guidelines. If there are new guidelines that are absolutely needed, then let's do it correctly and not inadvertently do it only from the most restrictive means, which is what this does.
Okay. I think that we're just going to take that under consideration if you will stand for if we have any questions from the council members. Otherwise, I know this will be on the agenda again Monday night, and I appreciate your insight. You both have worked with TIFs before, and we appreciate your knowledge and background.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, we're going to go to item number 12, introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6310. Do we have a presentation, Ms. Horton?
Yes, we do.
Do you want that now?
If we could also take items 12 and 13 together, because they're really, they are related.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and have your presentation now.
Yes.
Okay, it really wasn't on the agenda, so I didn't know where we were sliding that in, so we'll go ahead and have your presentation. If you could identify yourself and what your presentation is, we would appreciate it.
I'm the long-range planning manager, and my name is Patsy Horton. I have Ken Young with me. He is the community development director.
Just as a comment of introduction, I think you're all aware that we have been working on this diligently over the last 2.5 years, and prior to that, many ideas and conferences in regards to the need for some amendments to our tax increment financing policy. I appreciate that we have some concern and comments that have been expressed previously. Please know that we have been in contact and in conversation with not only Kent Hague, but many other developers and bankers over this time frame. And we have exhausted our abilities to further bring forward a better proposal. I do believe and should state that as far as Mr. Doyle's proposed TIF for his project is concerned, that if anything, our new policies are going to make it a better opportunity and easier. I think there's a misunderstanding generally out there that we're really tightening things up and making things more difficult for TIFs to be approved, and that's really not what is being brought forward. We're bringing a lot better criteria for the review of TIF applications. We're bringing forward new procedures and opportunities for improving the what's the word I'm looking for? Certification process of the costs and such involved. So although we are open and willing to look at further proposals that may come forward, I believe what we have proposed and what we're going to briefly present to you here now is a much better policy than what we have previously or that we have currently in place. And then also there are many needs and benefits that will come out of this new proposal. We have determined over the last couple of years that we really need to have a greater focus on promoting and assisting economic development, that we need greater focus on affordable housing and transit-oriented development. We need greater guidance for applicants in submitting their applications and going through the certification processes. There's been a lot of concerns with some certification processes over the years. That's because we haven't had enough policy in place for both applicants and staff to follow. And so we have come up with a much better program. So we're going to save time and money for both applicants and the city in these processes. We also have a need to just look more responsibly at those applications that are coming forward to determine specifically, is there a real determined necessity for tax increment financing? So with that, we feel that we've got a much better proposal coming forward, including those that I've just mentioned, and also many opportunities that will increase the ability to use tax increment financing throughout the community without area restrictions. We'll go ahead and give you a brief review of the proposal that we've come up with.
So we met with the cities of Aberdeen and Sioux Falls and visited with them, and a lot of their recommendations are included in this new policy. We've had over 10 public meetings, outreach opportunities. and all of those comments are included in a frequently asked question on the website. Just a couple revisions. We included a TIF chart, and one of the things that's important about this is there's a baseline established, and so any new increment, any new structural increase or valuation increase occurring within the district is included in that yellow area, and that is what's used to repay any of the project plan costs that were approved. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how that works. And so then we also updated the verbiage. We defined specifically some base application requirements, and we added, of course, the evaluation criteria that you've heard about before. And so here's the district map that we have existing today. As you can see, most all of our districts are on the outer core of our city limits. One of the issues that we see with that is that we are no longer focusing all of our, or most of our capital improvements costs within our core where we have more densities, but we're expanding our perimeter so that it costs more to provide those services to our residents. We have some targeted uses, the economic development, affordable workforce housing, development and redevelopment of infill and blighted areas. And then, of course, we have definitions on requirements for both blight and economic development. We enhanced our existing definition for economic development that is specifically associated with Elevate Rapid Cities and/or Economic Development Foundation when we got this information from the previous president, and that is to focus on healthcare and life sciences, research, financial and insurance companies, businesses, professional business services, metals manufacturing, and energy and small-scale food and beverage manufacturing. And that is specific from that plan that they had put together before the new venture came forward. So then we also have, excuse me, both blight and affordable housing. And Kent's correct, there is a 30% requirement in housing developments so that it addresses 60 to 80% AMI, and then 5% targeting households at or below 30%. Currently, the AMI for 2019 in our area is $67,500, so that's a rent that's below $1,189 for 80% AMI, and it's about $506 for the 30%. And then we have blight and workforce housing. The workforce housing is based on South Dakota Housing Development Authority limits. The single-family home purchase price is $275,000, and the income limit on that for our county is $90,300. And so when you look at that, you have 70% of those homes within that residential development that can be up to a $275,000 home, or somebody's income at $90,000. And so then we are also targeting our existing master plan implementation tasks, Plan Rapid City, Downtown Master Plan, our Utility System Master Plan, our CIP program, and our Community Development Block Grant. And so then also we've got some infill and redevelopment areas, and we've talked about that core area, which is our original town, 1 mile to 2 miles out beyond that, and then also the revitalization and nodes corridors within our existing comprehensive plan. And then one of the things that Ken referenced was our transit-oriented development. That's to encourage motorized use of our infrastructure. That's really where a lot of our younger folks are gearing towards, is they want to live and work in their within a small area so that they don't have to drive all the time. And so then there are some changes to the project management. It's then consistent with our existing development applications. There's a review team made up of finance, community development, public works, our Elevate Rapid City president, and then also we meet with the applicant to review the proposal before they submit it. Once the application moves forward, then we take it to the school and the county for their information, which is consistent with what's required in the state law. And then we work on the project planning agreements and bring it forward for approval, and then the city manages the public improvements to include design, construction, and construction management, which is consistent with all other public improvements in our community. So then the guiding principles, there's really no guarantee of approval. That's in our existing plan. TIF should be used only as a necessity. That's also in our existing plan. And then there's a 10-year payoff encouraged, not required, but just encouraged so that it reduces the financing costs. There's affordable housing in there, economic development. It should be used for blight and excessive development costs, and it still has to comply with all the regulations. There's increased construction valuation, fund projects and financing costs, taxation waivers, and that is referencing there are some potential tax abatements, property tax abatements that are available for apartment structures, and we want to make sure that, you know, those abatements are not requested within a tax increment district, because what that does is it reduces the increment that's generated. And then we're trying to limit it to 2 overlapping districts. And we have performance measures. We have limited economic development grants, and those are specifically unrelated to public infrastructure. So it's something that, you know, we've done in the past, but we want to try to limit those specific grants. And then we very carefully review the project costs. So then our eligible costs are specifically tied to public infrastructure needs. There's an administrative fee, and we will work with the developer to refine the costs as necessary and within reason. And of course, the base requirements, we talked about those just a little bit, but it's a determination of necessity. Is it financially feasible, and what is the fiscal impact from the project? We're going to look at the cost projections to make sure that they're accurate and consistent with a 2-year standard. And then we have the ability to get an outside market analysis and legal review if we need it. And the point system is based on a required 10-point minimum out of 28 points. And it appears that I have the wrong presentation, but that's okay, we'll work through them. And if a project cannot achieve at least 10 points, then we need to look to see whether that's really an adequate or appropriate use of TIF funding. So the evaluation criteria, I'm going to go through these real quick. It reduces or eliminates the actual or potential public hazards, and each of these really gains a point on the evaluation criteria chart. The results, the TIF results in the redevelopment of blighted areas, results in new economic development, involves a transit-oriented development. It looks at the priority areas within our core community. It involves the startup of an entirely new business, involves the expansion of existing business, expanded employment opportunities, and we've got a minimum of new full-time jobs within the economic development that meets or exceeds the minimum wage based on economic development's number. From 2018, it was $17.64 per hour. Results in redevelopment in some of the target areas, provides affordable and workforce housing units, results in construction of public improvements. There's a developer agreement, which is consistent right now. There's regional infrastructure located in or near the TID proposal. There's a participation rate, which has never been included in the existing policy. And it's not for public construction. It's not for improvements of the construction of those improvements required within our existing subdivision regulations. And it's there's a reference in there to rehabbing historic buildings. And then, of course, it has to be for redevelopment of blighted conditions. We did identify what a blight condition is in our community because there's a lot of gray matter in our existing state regulation. It displays declining property values, and then the costs that generally that exceed the typical or average construction costs within our community. So there's several ways that applications can gain points to meet that 10-point minimum. And then we also included how the certification process works. But with that, we do recommend approval. Planning Commission recommended approval on last Thursday. And there's one other chart that I want to pull up while Ken talks just a bit.
So I just want to reiterate that we've put a lot of effort into this, and over the last couple of years, we've had several public opportunities for comment and review, and we have taken our revision proposal through that and have made several revisions to our proposed revision, and based on those comments. And so what we have here today is a very well thought out policy based on comments that we've also received from the state level, from Sioux Falls and other communities in the state that work with TIFs, and we feel like we have addressed all those concerns. It is not a restrictive policy, it is just a more defined policy, and it's going to help our entire process. I also want to mention that it was mentioned that John Way had concerns and that were being brought forward with this proposal. We have also met recently and spoken with John Way, and he expressed to us that his previous concerns with the proposal that is now revised since that time have been addressed. And so I really feel that although this may not be a perfect policy, it's much better than our current one, and it would be a great step for us to move forward with that, realizing that if there are additional revisions that might need to occur, we can address those, we can bring those forward. But I would strongly urge the council to consider approving this.
So I have just a little more information I want to share on how the housing numbers fall out. Sorry. And there is a little gremlin that's moving my machine back and forth without touching it, so just so you know. So let's talk about affordable housing. Our proposal is 30% of the housing units within a development that provides housing for the 60 to 80% of the area median income. 3% of that requires households to be provided for the 30% area median income. Our existing language in our policy specifically identifies today that if you're going to do an affordable housing TIF, you're required to provide 51 dwelling units at the 60 to 80% or less. So the proposed policy is even less than our existing policy today. The only addition is that now there's a 5% requirement to meet those very low income folks. And so what does that give us at $67,500? 80% is a $54,000 income. 30% is $2,250. And here are the rents associated with that. The rent includes the utilities. They estimate that no more than 30% of your income should be spent on your housing that includes utilities. And then, of course, the workforce housing that I referenced. Here's the income limit for South Dakota Housing, and then the first-time purchase price. And so then we have a chart that was put together by a housing group that's working on some of this stuff, and I pulled some census data to identify how many households are in each of these groups. So the lowest number that we have here is the under 20,000. That's 5,500 households. Between the 20 and 55,000 income range, there are just over 5,000 households. We have 4,600 in the next category up, which is 35 to 50, and then for those making 50 to 75, there are 50, not quite 5,500. So I wanted you to understand, how those incomes break out and really what kinds of workers we have in each of those categories. So the next thing I want to show you, I took a 40-acre piece of property from a submittal that we've received and identified how many single-family homes would have to have affordability, and then there's also some multifamily units out there. This proposal had a range of $160,000 to $225,000 homes with an average of 200. With these 102 single-family units, they'd have to provide 32 that are affordable, which means it's 80% or less, and then 4 that meet that 30%. There were about 6 acres for medium density, which would allow for multifamily, so that would come up to about 90 units. 27 of those would have to meet the 80% or less, and 2 would have to meet the 30% or less. So then I went out online and found another apartment complex that provides residential structures. And then I also put in provisions based on the buildings. There were 8 buildings out there, 160 total units. The rent does include utilities. Our existing policy requires 51% at or below 80% AMI, so that'd be 82 units. Our community development block grant requirements also are the same at 51%, and so are our HUD requirements at 51%. Now, of course, many of the HUD programs vary, but standard HUD loans require 51% for the entirety of the loan. Our new policy, again, is 30% at or below 80, which would be 48 units in this particular development, and 3 of those units would have to meet the 30% AMI. So just so that you know what our HUD numbers are, here's the fair market rent. You can see for a 1-bedroom, it's $639 for the 2020 fair market rent. And the income limits are for 80%, for 1 person it's $39,550, and for 2 persons it's $45,200. And so with this particular housing unit or apartment complex that I showed you before, with the 8 buildings, 160 units, their 1-person rent would be $988.75, excuse me, and then the 2-person maximum, based on the income just to the left, would be $1,130 per month. The 1-bedroom, 1-bath in this particular development is over $1,200. So I just wanted to give you some background information on one apartment complex in town that and how it fits and how many units would have to be included with that. But anyway.
Is all this information attached to the agenda then, Ms. Horton?
I can put this presentation out there.
Okay. If you would attach it to the agenda. And I do need to apologize. I did say our city council meeting was Monday night. It is not Monday night. It is Tuesday night due to the Martin Luther King holiday, so I apologize for misspeaking. Okay. I guess we have some questions. The chair recognizes Chad Lewis.
And we have a motion to send to council without recommendation. Second. The reason I'm doing that is because actually that's the motion that came out of Public Works, and I think just to keep it the same, it'd probably be a good idea for clarity for the public and for everybody up here as well. I was looking it up, I had to look up something. I was in an article called Tangled Up in TIFs, which is from October 22nd of 2007 in the Rhapsody Journal, which I'm quoted as saying, I think everybody thinks these are big giveaways, and that they're not. They allow development of land that would otherwise not be developed. You can look it up if you want to, if you're bored tonight. Anyway, I guess my issue is why are we fixing this? I'm not sure what's broken. This is something that Mr. Stroman asked yesterday. I know there's some things that might need fine-tuned, but what's success? What's the metric we use to measure success with a TIF? I would say the valuations have gone up drastically because of TIFs. We've had projects that were never, ever gone forward. Had the TIFs not been there, I can think of a couple off the top of hands. I'm guessing that the Horizon Point, I believe it's called, from Black Hills Energy, was part of a TIF. That was an incentive to bring forth economic development. Obviously, that's something that's allowed in the new policy as well, but I think Buffalo Crossing across the street was a huge mound of dirt, and much to my kids' chagrin, the water slides are gone, but now we've got a large tax base coming in there right now with not only property tax, but sales tax as well, and big generators of those. There's a lot of other examples throughout the city, and I just think that people need to understand that there has to be an incentive for people to do these things, and to put a 10-year limit on these things. I realize there's an accommodation for more than 10 years now, but the financing becomes a problem at that point. Bankers are less likely to lend you money if they have a cap on their guarantee. There's no appeal to city council that I can see in this. Maybe I'm wrong. And I think that's the voice of the people. And I think we should always be involved in every process possible. I just don't see. I understand maybe you need to increase the fees. I can to oversee them. I understand that. I'm not sure an outside consultant is the way to go because I know that's drastically going to increase the costs to administer a TIF or a project. I look at people like Hill City and Sturgis are jumping on board, and they're allowing TIFs now, and they're starting to use TIFs to develop out that way. And I think we're going to be shooting ourselves in the foot. Box Elder allows them if we limit their usage because people are going to start building, and they already are starting to build out in those directions more. It's going to limit our own growth, and the idea of this is to help the in-growth. Well, I get that, but I don't think we're in inner city Detroit. I don't think we have large, vast tracts of land that are in need of redevelopment around here. I think we have most of the public infrastructure is already to these properties and into these areas, and so I can't see the benefit or the recapture of a TIF at that point. If you were to take a piece of property somewhere downtown and try to redevelop it and to apply a TIF, I don't know how it's going to benefit anybody, if it's even feasible. I don't see that happening. I could be wrong. But these are my concerns. I didn't support it the first time, and I just always have staunchly stood up as a defender of TIFs. I've never used one. I don't even quite know exactly how to go through the process. I mean, I got a good idea. But I just think that if you look at the topography around here, if you look at the way our lay of our land around here, the bad soils, the hills, the rocks, everything else, there's a lot of reasons for these TIFs, folks, and they are definitely a positive for the city in the long run. I mean, it's just like putting an investment in now and you're going to get paid back later. The average life of a TIF, I think, is something like 7 years, if I'm correct. No? It's longer? Okay. A lot of them have paid off earlier, but okay, if that's even better, that actually strengthens up my point about the 10-year then limitation. But the point is a lot of good things have come from these TIFs, and I think that people don't appreciate how hard it is to get financing and how to make these projects worthwhile to doing without some sort of incentive. When you mentioned Sioux Falls, well, Sioux Falls also bonds out and builds the infrastructure ahead of time to where they want to go. And we don't do that in this town. Maybe we can make that switch, but it's not an overnight switch. And until that process is in place, until we actually have other ways of making people, want to go out and risk millions of dollars and banks lend millions of dollars, we need to have some sort of tool out there. And I just I don't think these are abused anymore. I think at the beginning there might have been some things allowed that shouldn't have been. But we've refined that, and that's my feelings on it. I guess I'll be supporting no when it goes to City Council Monday night. Thank you.
I have a point of clarification, Mr. Lewis. Was your motion for item 12 and 13 together? Okay, thank you. The chair now recognizes Richie Nordstrom, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can keep this very brief, several questions that I have. If I can start off with Patsy, please. Could you address that appeal process of the TRC?
When a district is created, state law is very clear that Planning Commission has to make a recommendation to create the district. If not, if the Planning Commission doesn't approve it, there is no appeal process anyway.
Okay. And I'm also supporting the motion. The guidelines, I want to make sure everybody understands guidelines versus a rule or an ordinance. And you're really emphasizing the word guidelines to me, what I'm hearing. These are guidelines.
So there are two items before you. The ordinance changes the makeup of who reviews the policy and the applications. Today, the ordinance requires the existing TIF review committee and how that process works. The resolution adopts the policy, so the new ordinance will reference the policy, and any time the policy may or may not be changed, but it removes the TIF committee requirement.
I see. And then could you explain transit development a little bit more for me to understand what that means? Because I think I've got an idea what it means, but I want to make sure that the guidelines spell it out as well.
So we're encouraging higher densities where there are existing transit stops, yes. So that people don't have to rely on a vehicle to get to work, to get to their food, to get to their medical appointments. They can make it to a transit stop, which is less than 3/4 mile from their home or work.
Thank you. And then overlapping, one of the considerations that I've been looking at, and I'm getting the opportunity of being in the middle of conversations from one side versus, well, maybe not so much versus, but they have statements from one side, and then I'm getting comments from another perspective. So overlapping question that came up, and that has to do with TID districts being developed on top of another one, on top of another one. Can you help me understand that is going away? And yes, go ahead.
We're encouraging no more than 2 overlapping districts. Okay. And the reason for that is because the first district has to generate the way to pay off those property tax, those project costs first, while as soon as the second one comes in, they have a secondary, they're in line second after the first one is paid off. Yep. So we want to encourage no more than 2 so that the third one has some ability to actually pay off. So we're trying to limit it to 2.
Yep, so you can actually see the increment for the third one, yeah.
So that the second one actually pays off.
Exactly.
Because, the first one can come in and make changes, depending on, a couple years ago when we first put this in the policy, there was not an allowable way to add anything to the project plan without redetermining the base valuation. Once that happens, generally most of that increment disappears and you have to start all over when the base valuation is redetermined. And we were trying to prevent, the secondary TIF from not having any ability to pay off.
And I'm seeing one of my constituents out there that's about ready to leave. Like, Doyle, is it possible to ask you a question first before you leave, if I may? You mentioned something about the Homestead Street, and I'm very, very interested in this project going forward on that for a variety of reasons. Again, I'm hearing two different versions and 2 different sides of the story, being a person in the middle, and I'm not going to state what I'm hearing here, but I have that opportunity to hear that. But what are your concerns with Homestead with this proposed changes?
I really haven't examined what you're proposing to change. My point is this: I know what the current rules are now, and I'm willing to play the current rules for my wife and I to borrow $1 million to build the road. But if looks like you're going to change the rules, so therefore our offer that we made the offer, the rules that we made the offer based on, if they change, then our offer goes away, and we'll have to see if we can work with what you're trying to do. If I heard you right, your application fee is $20,000?
No.
No? What is the $20,000?
That's the administrative fee.
I see. Okay.
And you don't pay that anyway.
So
Anyway, I don't know what your current rules are. Are you reducing the period to 10 years?
no, it's just a recommendation, or excuse me, I'm using the wrong word. It's an encouragement to go to 10 years, not a requirement. But
Okay.
There's incentives in there to. But anyway, Patsy can.
I need to run, but my point is this.
Yep.
We made our offer to do this to various council people based on what the current rules are. But if you change the rules and no longer, what we have now, then I don't know what they're going to be. So our offer, me and Kathy, is off the board, and we'll have to see if we can make it work with your new rules. That's all I want to say.
Understand. That's fair.
Thank you.
Can I just make one clarification?
Sure.
If you can meet the 10-year requirement or recommendation, you get 1 point on the evaluation score. That's it.
Oh, okay. Additional.
Just for clarification. One out of 28. You get 1 point for that.
If it's under 10 years. Thank you.
And can I also add one more thing before you continue?
Okay.
One of the reasons that we're trying to implement this is the requirement in state law for public hearing before Planning Commission with the application before it goes to council for a public hearing. What we see on numerous occasions is that the applicants come to the council to request special costs to be included in an application and vet their entire proposal before council, before it's even submitted as an application. In my opinion, I'm not an attorney, but that doesn't meet the public hearing requirement. And what I've seen with the county zoning regulations, they missed one deadline and their zoning regulations were thrown out. I'd hate for that to happen to our proposal as well, for TIF applications.
Okay. Do you have any other questions, Mr. Nordstrom?
One more, if I may.
Okay.
The project plan amendments, is that going away? Is that your proposal? Is project plan amendments going away?
No, they are still required by state law.
Okay. And there's some other people I need to visit with, but let me do that after the meeting, and thank you for your indulgence on this.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. The chair recognizes Darla Drew.
Patsy, if you could just stay there for a second. I want to understand this clearly. So the TIF committee is not a requirement any longer? You don't present in front of a TIF committee?
It's not a requirement in state law today.
Right, but so we're going to get rid of that as a requirement?
Yes.
So the decision will be made by staff and then presented to us, is that correct?
So the decision is really based on that evaluation chart. The applicant first submits how they scored their application. We look at it, we work with the developer to come up with a reasonable proposal. If it meets the minimum score, it still moves forward.
Okay, okay. Well, as I recall, when we were looking at this, the council directed community development to go ahead and do a new TIF policy. And that's what we wanted to see. You guys have done a lot of work on this, and thank you for this. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if I agree with all these things, but I think there are some recommendations that I'd like to see go forward. So I'll be studying this as well over the weekend. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for the great comments. We have a motion by Lewis and a second by Lehman to move items 12 and 13 to the City Council meeting on Tuesday night without recommendation. See no further comment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have a motion to adjourn by Nordstrom. Second by Drew. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Tuesday night is the meeting. Thank you.